Hey there, everybody. We're in the last episode of the first day, and I'm very excited to present or co present with Yan Vishnepolsky. He is a heavyweight from the user experience world. He's been working with Fortune 500 companies like Ford and other companies in that area. He's also the co host of the Human Centered AI podcast. And yeah, today we're going to discuss some of the insights and findings that he's been able to uncover through his podcast interviews.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's my pleasure. And Jan, you're based out of Hawaii. You've traveled the world. You've started an agency. You've done a whole bunch of different things. You also are a martial arts badass.
Yeah,
Practitioner, right?
I have done mixed martial arts for like 9 years. My best friend in college and afterwards, he taught me how to do mixed martial arts, and then for the last like 5 years, I switched gears and I've been very into weightlifting, and I weightlift like 6 times a week, and I'm very focused on that. So those are my hobbies.
Nice. So, I think right before we started this dialogue, we were talking about the earlier episodes that you had, and one in particular that sticks out is the one with Nick Fine, right?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
mentioned
So
that.
that one we talked about quantitative user research and how AI could be used for that. What are the drawbacks? What are the positives? And so that was the start of season 2, which is how we started this year.
Can you give me the scoop? What is quantitative user research, and where do you apply it, and why is AI gonna revolutionize or support that?
Well, it's an open question if it will or if it won't. I feel like time will address that. Um, but quantitative user research, to take a step back, is the study of numbers, specifically the numbers of user data. How do we look at users in the context of analytical data? That's a question that's often addressed by quantitative user research. How do we understand our users in terms of population type behaviors or tendencies like on a more narrower focus? Um, can we address these sorts of questions with various kinds of user research data like card sorts and tree tests? And so that's quantitative user research. And then in the context of AI, now that AI exists, how can AI be part of that process? How can we use it? And what are its limitations? And what can go wrong, and how do we avoid that? And how can we leverage it to get the most out of quantitative user research work?
That's quite a expansive landscape to cover. What were your
Yes.
insights? What were your insights from that conversation?
So the challenge becomes that that right now with today's technology, generative AI might not be the best tool to use for quantitative user research in terms of analyzing and adding numbers together or doing basic mathematics. Generative AI is not great at that, but it is good at brainstorming. And so when we talk about brainstorming with to set up quantitative user research, which is a very brainy sort of topic, and it can help user researchers think about what sort of studies they should be doing, and that is definitely leaning into generative AI's strong suits. So the key with any tool, and that includes AI, is figuring out what it's good at and how do you use it to get the most out of it. And that's how we approached the quantitative user research subject.
What are the ethical considerations behind those techniques?
Well, the problem is that when you actually try to use it to do real math, like statistics, that's a common kind of math that's used in quantitative user research, or probability. then it becomes an iffy proposition. And so um, with today's technology, I'm sure it will be fixed soon. But with today's technology as things are right now, generative AI is not really good at math. And that's because of how generative AI was created. It basically takes like a large amount of data, and then it predicts the most likely word in a sentence in its responses to people, to users. And so when users give generative AI a prompt, it comes up with the most likely response. That most likely response might not be the right answer to the right math question. And so and you don't want that when you're trying to do quantitative user research. But for the same reason, that's why it's very powerful when it comes to brainstorming, because it rarely gives the same answer twice, and it can pivot based off of the information that you're providing. It usually types, like it outputs words faster than a person can read, and so effectively that means that you can brainstorm with it very quickly. And so in terms of sheer output of creativity, like the amount of thoughts per minute or whatever that it could generate, it can outperform a human in that way. And so the key is to leverage that quantity to get some quality, and in this case, quantitative user research.
If I could just take a step back for a second, I know we sort of dove headfirst into your findings, but can we just define a little bit more on the parameters of what it means to be a user research and how you contribute to the product development lifecycle?
Yeah. So user researchers are human-centered professionals. We try to understand the users of products and how they're impacted by those products emotionally and otherwise. How they use those products in the context of their day, and crucially, how can we improve those products so that users are more satisfied with them, or whatever emotion that we're trying to achieve with that product, happy, joy, so forth. We can try to iterate those products using insights from users. And we often work with designers to implement our findings. So designers come in before and after user researchers are involved, and they use our insights to make designs out of them.
The researchers and the designers have a symbiotic relationship, right? Because you said they come before and after, but researchers
Yes.
also come before and after designers. So it's one
Yes.
recursive loop of giving
Yes.
and taking insight.
Yes, that's right. It's a very chicken in the egg sort of situation. What ends up happening is in startups, why UX designers come before the process is that in startups it makes more sense to hire a generalist, and most UX designers can do user research. And so the typical approach in a startup is to hire a UX designer first, and then as the user research hits the limits of the capabilities of that UX designer, then a user researcher comes in to further the user research maturity, the quality of the work, and then we start iterating on the existing user research and developing stronger insights. And then, of course, the UX designers then take those insights and build more designs out of them, which then the user researchers test to see if there's ways to improve them. We then go back and do more generative research, like big picture research about like the direction of the product and if it's going in the right direction at that point, and so on and so forth. And so it just becomes like this very intertwined process. And when I'm referring to designers here, it's important to mention that conversational designers, not just UX designers, but conversational designers, have a huge impact in the world of AI, because so much of it is text-based or voice-based design. And so conversational designers have a huge role to play in this process, and they are as much our partners as UX designers.
Yeah. If I could like zoom all the way out, there's businesses, for-profit organizations and non-profit organizations, and both have some sort of function in society. For-profit is to make as much money as possible, and non-profit is to make as big of an impact as possible. Um, but they provide products and services in society that solve problems. And those solutions have trade offs, and sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad. But user research and design are ways of engaging with the world and engaging internally to refine that problem solution harmonization. How do we solve something using less resources? How do we make it more attractive, more functional, more scalable, etc.? Um, it's a really fascinating field if you're hungry for knowledge. So bringing now that we have the full context painted as user research, designers, and society, you were saying that Nick Fine was discussing quantitative user research, which is aggregating all these statistical data to make findings, right? Derive some sort of insight from um, doing surveys and other massive tracking efforts, right?
Yes, that's right. Surveys are a type of quantitative user research. Then we have card sorts, which are more focused on information architecture. So we write cards, like basic little topics of that are formed units of information that people can sort. And so we look at large numbers of users, at least 20, for card sorts, and then we look at how different people combine those together to see how information should be organized, either in an application or in the real world. It doesn't always have to be software.
And you mentioned that there's quantitative and there's qualitative aspects to statistics, which is the science that goes behind the research, right? And you said
Yeah.
that LLMs are the ones that are more suited for creative endeavors and can help you scaffold ideas, but not so much for the precision of crunching numbers and deriving. Okay, here's how we can reuse this information for the next product development. So you were saying from here that one core concept was another conversation with Nick and Larry, right?
Yeah. So one of the things that's also a trend in technology is neurodiversity and being aware of diversity in general. And it just so happens that Dr. Nick Fine and myself were both neurodiverse professionals in UX. And I was curious to see, are neurodiverse UX professionals using AI tools differently in terms of our work because we think differently? And if so, can we address that on the show? That turned out to be a very interesting episode. I also had my mentor, Larry, come onto the show. Larry is also neurodiverse in his own way, neurodivergent, I should say, in his own way. And the three of us, we talked about how, as neurodivergent professionals, we leverage AI tools to accomplish UX work, and that was the topic of the episode.
What were the findings? What were the insights that were gathered from that?
So each person tends to be neurodivergent in their own way. Like, even if we're diagnosed in the same way, like let's suppose you have two people who are diagnosed as on the autistic spectrum, let's say. That does not mean that their symptoms present in the same way. And so therefore, the way that they would use the AI tools would be different, even within the neurodivergent community. And this is actually a strength of AI, as we addressed earlier on the show, and the episode today. We talked about how generative AI can tailor its responses to individuals. and to individual prompts that are given to it. And so if of course it's talking to a neurodivergent professional about an issue that they're facing or they're trying to solve in the course of their UX work, AI becomes a very powerful tool to lean in on that because it can tailor its response to the individual. The key, of course, is to set up that conversation for success so that the users, so that the AI tool understands that it's in fact talking to a neurodivergent person and not a neurotypical person. So that's step one. And then to understand step two, like how is this particular person neurodivergent, and and then finally, like the same thing that every neurotypical or neurodivergent person would need to address, which is what is the problem that they're trying to solve today? What are they trying to get out of the conversation with the chatbot? And so these 3 steps and more are what need to be addressed by the neurodivergent professional. But in terms of the AI community, what needs to be addressed is, are these models actually capable of talking to neurodivergent professionals? Have they been trained to handle these sorts of situations? That remains to be an open question. Cute cat. And as we look forward in the future and look to conduct more research on this problem of whether AI tools accommodate neurodivergent professionals, that's something that can be, I'm sure, further iterated on in the future.
And you mentioned another conversation that was particularly interesting to you with George Arango.
Yes.
And that was what, he's an information architect?
Yes, that's right. He's an information architect. And UX basically sprung out of information architecture in some ways. A lot of the concepts that are in UX come from information architecture originally. And so it was great to have an information architect of George's, Carol Ober, on the show. And so we talked about how AI is impacting information architecture, but also how information architecture is shaping AI in the future of that.
Yeah, I'm aware that information architecture is also, like you said, a higher level abstraction of user experience design, more to architect how information is designed or structured, and then user experience is more closer to the interactions of the system, right?
Yes. So basically, information needs to be organized in order for it to be understood. That's a key concept of both information architecture, information architecture, and UX design. The concept there is called cognitive overload. And so we want to present the information with just the right amount of complexity so that the work can be done at speed in the case of a work application, but also so that it can be understood and easy to use. And so it's a balancing act. And the same applies to AI tools to this day, because the AI tools need to be presenting in these conversations in terms of conversational design. They need to be outputting information in a way that the users can read and follow them. The users need to be able to understand how to use these AI tools in a way that's intuitive and easy to follow. And information architecture plays a huge role in
that. You wanted to also talk about the ethical considerations of an upcoming episode.
So that's a previous episode. So so we in the subject of multiple previous episodes, we've had a number of discussions about ethical AI and how and particularly in the light of UX, because we're all UX professionals on the show, the hosts and the guests. And so from that perspective, we've talked about bias. That was a big subject because of how the AI models are trained. There's a lot of ways that they could be further optimized to minimize bias. Right now, the way that data annotators are recruited to work for these AI models, the data annotators are the ones that train the models. So the way that those trainers are being recruited to work, it could be further optimized to reduce biases in these models. That's one thing that has come out of some of the episodes that we've had on the show. But there's also considerations in terms of diversity of the users and ensuring that the AI models can address users of all walks of life from all parts of the world. And so there's a lot of room for growth in that area, but of course, opportunity as well.
Let me ask you this: in the context of that pocket of information that we just discussed, where do you balance the threshold between safety and innovation?
Safety and innovation. So the trick is that we have to, like you said, and it's applied in the question. Balance is the key, and so it's the most important thing. I don't think that it's necessary to preach and to be extreme on one side or the other, so much as like we understand the decisions and we're making an informed choice between one and the other. And so when we are deciding to be innovative, we are aware of the potential harms as we are doing so. And if we decide to be conscious of safety, then we are aware of the impact on innovation. And so to that end, of course, research of all kinds needs to be in play, including user research, to make sure that the decisions on a product management level are informed.
And this might be kind of a sideways question, but you were doing some research with a colleague on, the brain's function and how you can sort of model the behavior of the brain with multiple actors, multiple sections. Is that correct?
So one of the questions that, and this is current research, and so we don't have any findings yet, but I feel like it's a fun question to pursue. Dr. Jared Kellerman and myself, we are currently addressing the impact of AI. On the functioning of brain patterns of user researchers, and so that's like the output of, or the goal of the research. So the challenge is that we are two independent researchers, and we're not operating under a board of ethics. And so to tackle that issue, because normally with any kind of academic issue research, we would need to go through a board of ethics to make sure that the harms are not greater than greater beyond tolerances. And so to tackle that issue, we are the subject of our own research. And so we're conducting this research on ourselves to see how our own behaviors change as we use AI tools. And so it's a currently running study, and I'm excited about what we will find, because I feel like there's a lot to be learned on that subject. The inspiration for that is actually social media and how it's now coming out that social media has impacted the psychology of humans, particularly teenagers, but also adults as well. And so rather than waiting 10 years like it happened with social media before like these sorts of things come to light, I'm trying to get a jump on the issue and figure it out sooner rather than later.
Where do you see yourself taking the usage of LLMs forward, like in your practice as a researcher?
Right. So the challenge is that these models are growing so fast. It's so hard to predict what will happen a month from now or 6 months from now, more so, that making any kind of predictions quickly become dated. And so I'm aware of the problems right now, and I'm aware of generally like where some of these big company AI models are going, like Bard, for instance, and so forth. And so the companies seem to be uh, asking the right questions and interested in improving the models in good ways. I currently work as a side job at Data Annotation, which is a company that helps train these AI models. And as I speak, Bard is being trained to understand dialects of English. Like, for instance, in India, I spent 9 years in India. In India, there's a dialect of English called Hinglish. And so the models are being trained right now to speak English, which is pretty cool. And that certainly starts to take a stab at bias, which we addressed in this conversation. And so I'm encouraged by that sort of work. The companies are also concerned about safety and the models causing potential harm. And so there are projects that are addressing those topics. And so it does seem like the heart of these models and the product teams that are working on them is in the right place, which makes me happy. But there's certainly more that could be done. I hope that AI companies engage the UX community and get us involved with working on these AI models. There's so many UX professionals that would love to have a crack at this. And I hope that the AI companies give us a chance.
You mentioned something interesting to me in the context of labeling data for models. And earlier you said that a big component of your discussions has been mitigating bias in developing these models. But I guess the question is, when is something biased or not biased, depending on the scope and the use case?
It's a difficult question to answer. There are areas of research, of academic and scientific research, that just focus entirely on bias. Even those that don't, like, understanding bias is just like a huge area of science that as it relates to humans. But even like outside of science that relates to humans, bias even comes into play with physics. Like the Heisenberg principle says that if you measure something, you're going to change what you're measuring. And so like bias is just like everywhere. And so I feel like this is a topic that will never be fully addressed, to be honest with you, because of Heisenberg's principle. And because also there's a science called ethnography. Ethnography says that bias can never be eliminated as well. And so, as someone who believes in and to some extent understands both of those principles, I think that it's a journey, and we will keep getting closer to reducing the bias. But ultimately, the goal is not to eliminate bias, but to keep it human-centered, so that we're not causing harm to people, so that people are getting what they want out of these applications, whether it's to have fun, to have a friend, to accomplish some work, and whatever their goal is trying to achieve, that the LLMs are being a good partner, a good tool in accomplishing that goal.
In your continuous development of this podcast and media production, you're coming across quite a few individuals in the space of UX. What are you hoping to derive, towards the end of the year?
Yeah, so the goal of the show is to bring the UX and AI communities together, and in one community, so that we can talk to AI professionals and understand their concerns and what they're looking for, and AI companies can understand what value addition UX professionals can create in the space of AI, where we can lean in and where they could use us. And so the goal, and that's a continuing goal. And as the show continues to broadcast, and as we continue to talk to knowledgeable guests in all facets of UX and AI, that we get a deeper understanding and form better relationships within the community, and form as an aggregator.
So Savneet Singh, the previous speaker, made mention to media literacy, right? That's an important component in understanding where information comes from and if it's trustworthy or not. Other people have pointed out data literacy or AI literacy, which are two different things, but one precedes the other. And now you're talking about building a bridge between the UX and the AI worlds. So I want to ask you, what would entail UX literacy?
Well, UX literacy is an entire career. I've been in UX for about 15 years now, and it's been a journey. There's many good books on the topic of UX that address the subject of UX. There's excellent academic programs like General Assembly that's out there if you wanted to take like in-person classes to address your knowledge of UX. There's also online programs like Nielsen Norman Group. That's the one that I recommend. And so there are plenty of great resources, free and paid, to learn about UX. And I feel like that's an important topic as we address UX and AI, because first you need to understand UX before you go too deep into AI, because otherwise you're not going to fully understand the intersection.
Do you have any final takeaways on your ongoing journey towards bridging these two worlds together?
Yes. So our upcoming episode that's next Wednesday is going to feature Darren Hood. Darren Hood has been talking about UX maturity, that is like the growth of UX in organizations for a long time, like over a decade, not more. And so I'm excited to have him on to come on as a guest next Wednesday, because we're going to be talking, of course, about AI and how UX maturity within the context of AI is going to work. What level of AI do organizations need? How does a UX mature organization use AI? And where are organizations at right now as we speak in that process? And what can they do to improve? And so these are all topics that we're going to address with Darren Hood. And I can hardly imagine someone more qualified to address those topics than Darren. And I'm very excited about that episode.
That's a key point that you made there, that UXers need to know how to communicate and accelerate the adoption and maturity of AI efforts, because they themselves are acquirers of information and disseminators of information. So if they can educate, if they're educated, they can support the education and proactive development of responsible AI, explainable AI solutions.
Right. So that you start with learning UX, and once you learn the basics of UX, then you start learning about AI through events like today's, and we start looking at what role AI can have in that picture, having both frameworks in mind. What does AI do, and what are the opportunities to improve it? What does UX do, and how can it add to the picture? And once you have both gears in mind, then your brain could start churning out ideas of how you can improve AI accordingly.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, I think I derive some insight, and I think I've found a more sequential, smoother transition for explaining how to get into responsible AI. And it
Yes.
makes sense. You have to understand the limitations and priorities of people's psychology and mental models, and
Yes.
that leads to how do you make a system that is truthful, explainable, responsible, with safety guardrails in place.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that it's good. We have exciting times ahead because there's so much that can be done in this space. And I think that as we see changes happen, it's just going to be wild because like the time that we are living in is not so different from when the internet came to be. And the internet in 1990, wow, that has changed from the way that it is today. And so I think that we could look forward to changes of the same degree in terms of AI in the coming years.
I think Savneet said it pretty well in the previous presentation, but people think that AI, all these things that they hear on the news and on social media platforms like this, that it's so widespread. It's actually just a select slice of the population around the world. So many, so many parts of the world are untouched by these ideas. So we really have an opportunity to define what it is to create and engage with these technologies. So
That's right. If you follow, I feel like an analogous technology to this situation would be the spread of social media. There was a time when many parts of the world were untouched by social media. Now those parts are fewer and fewer between, and the growth of AI, if anything, is faster than social media. And so when as that continues, as this technology continues to grow, um, it will become more and more set in stone of how it works and what people's expectations are. So the right moment to start working on these things is now.
well, thank you very much, Jan, for coming on. And yeah, man, let's keep trucking. I want to see. This is the first year for the podcast, right?
Yes, we
I,
just finished our first year.
I can't wait to see what happens in year 5 and year 10 and year 20. You know,
Absolutely. Same with Swarm, likewise. And it's so good to be here again and have an opportunity to speak with you. Appreciate it.
we'll do collabs, we'll do workshops and things like that.
Yes, yes, definitely on the agenda.
All right. Well, thank you guys for joining us for these wonderful sessions today. Yeah, we'll see you tomorrow morning, and that'll be this is the end of day 1.
Have fun tomorrow. Bye.